Hi again. My name is Lonnie and this is the Live Williston channel. Live stands for local issues, voices, and events. And these pertain to Williston, North Dakota. And the event that is coming up very shortly is an election on June 9th, 2026. So in this batch of videos, there are 6 videos that are put out on the topic of the mayoral race. So that, along with the 2 city commission seats, will be determined based on the results of the June 9th election. Just note, there are no primaries for the seats for the 2 commission seats and the mayoral race. There are some state legislature positions that are primaries this go round with the general in November. That all said, in this video, this is the 6th video in a batch of 6. 4 of the other videos, I go into one video for each of the mayoral candidates. I got to sit down for a one-on-one conversation with 3 of the 4 mayoral candidates. And then the first video just shares a little bit more about the process that I used and introducing people broadly to the 4 candidates. In this video, I would like to highlight some of the concerns that I have with our community. These are based on just observations I've made and things that I've noticed or that are important to me. They at times might seem like small issues, but I do think that they point to a difference in philosophy that the current commission has to many of the constituents in Williston. So that all said, I would like to go through and share with you some of my concerns. And if I have noteworthy comments from the conversations I had with candidates, mayoral candidates, or what I heard from them in the forums, I will share my thoughts on how they lean in these various issues. So one of those issues that I have, and I have been vocal to the existing city commission about this concern for a few years now, and I'll try not to get lost in the weeds here. There's a lot of detail to this, but to try to simplify a little bit, the department heads for the City of Williston, these are the head of engineering, the police chief, the public works director, the airport director, fire chief, finance director, HR director, economic development director, development services director, that oversees like planning and zoning in the building department, and CVB director, convention and visitors bureau, and finally library director. So several years ago, it came on my radar that the library director and the CVB director, their salaries had been increased a significant amount. I believe the decision was made, I believe, in 2018 or 19 for the following year. And it jumped substantially, like from 80-some thousand to 115,000, I believe, in 1 year. It jumped substantially. Maybe that was over the course of 2 years. And when I dug into the rationale for that, because the other department heads, the salaries stayed relatively stable during those years. And when I delved into it, I discovered that it was the previous HR director to who we have now. Sherry Perazina at the time was serving as the HR director, and David Twan was serving as the city administrator. And apparently they were the 2 people who advocated for that change. And I did have a conversation with Sherry at that time. I believe it was back in 2019 or 2020, somewhere in there. And in that conversation, when I asked her why she advocated for this change, she told me over the phone that they attributed the previous discrepancy in pay, where the CVB and library director were paid substantially less than the other department heads. They attributed that to gender inequity, and she used that phrase with me. Now, I am not a fan of the DEI approach to hiring or compensation. When I look at the employee handbook for the City of Williston, it prohibits hiring or promotion or compensation based on gender, for instance. So the fact that they did that in the name of gender inequity, when I think there are plenty of other reasons that your library director and CVB director would be compensated far less than the other department heads. I just think it's elementary reasoning to standardize the department head salaries and call them all department heads within the organizational structure for the City of Williston, despite them all being in different sectors of society. But just because they are government jobs all under the banner of the City of Williston, they standardized the salaries. Now, that is not to say that they made them all exactly the same. There are a few different ranges. So right now, library and CVB director make around $123,000 a year. Development services, again, that's over planning and zoning and the building department and code enforcement. That position, along with economic director, HR director, finance director, all make about $140,000. And then we jump up to fire chief, airport director, public works, all making around that $153,000. And then the highest are police chief, $154,000, and city engineer, $157,000. So all of that to say, from library director at the bottom and CVB director at the bottom with about $123,000 to city engineer right at $157,000. So what is that? $34,000 spread. And I would also note at the time, years ago, when the City Commission opted to increase the library director and CVB director's salaries substantially, at that time our library director had a high school diploma. Now, I haven't kept up on that to know whether or not she eventually obtained more education, but my understanding is that she was hired based on her years of experience in the library. So if she had 4 years experience working for the library, that was equated with 4 years with a college degree. No mention that most librarians have a master's degree. I think the vast majority of librarians have a master's degree in library science. Again, I might be mistaken on that. I haven't looked at all of the data, but common sense would tell me that a library director for the library of our size here in Williston and the amount of staff, the size of the budget, all of that does not warrant someone making $123,000. So I did get into the weeds, didn't I? But I guess I bring it up. I do think it's an important topic. I think it points to a difference in philosophy. The City Commission will likely tell you that, well, we did a Graves study comparing, these salaries to other department head salaries. Again, I would suggest that common sense tells you that those positions are overpaid. I'm not going to say the CVB and library director positions are overpaid. I'm not going to say that the other positions are underpaid, but I do think it's interesting. In the last several years, we've had turnover with the police chief, with the airport director, with the fire chief, now with Hercules leaving, with the finance director. Economic development moved up. Sean Wenko moved up to the city administrator. But we have seen a lot of turnover in the other positions. I don't know whether those salaries capping out had anything to do with those individuals deciding to move on for the ones who decided themselves to move on. But I am concerned especially about the library director and CVB director making so much money. And when I did bring this up with the candidates, it seemed like Sean Rodas and Mason White both were more inclined to agree with my reasoning. James Burvig commented that he sees making a change in this he sees it as going backward and would not advocate for it. So kind of that progressive mentality that any change is good change and we don't want to go backwards. And I would just suggest that you're correcting an error instead of going backwards. So that is one of my concerns with comments on how the candidates responded. I didn't get to sit down with Corey Swint, so I can't speak to how he would view that issue. Another concern that I have had, or I guess I'll word it this way, an idea that I've advocated for because of my concern about the city involvement in all of the buying and selling of real estate. I've brought forward this idea of, would the city commission just simply publish a report to the public each year outlining the land holdings and if they've disposed of any property in the previous year, sharing who they sold it to, for what purpose, and if they acquired any property in the last year, what they bought it for, and what the purpose of that property is. So that is just something that I think would increase transparency and be a good check on all of these land dealings that our city commission is currently making. All right, as far as how the candidates, if they had any comments on that particular topic, I did feel like James Burvig was totally open to that idea of having a report to the people on the land holdings each year. He mentioned that he wanted to see a report like that as one of the commissioners recently, and so he recognized that the public might want to know more about that too. It also seemed like Sean Ronis and Mason White were fine with that, that they would advocate for something like that as well. In terms of the city involvement in buying and selling of property and kind of trying to get out of the real estate and development businesses, Sean Ronis agreed with that idea. Mason White seemed maybe not as firm on that, but he didn't seem opposed to the idea. And James Burvig made the comment, because I brought up that Corey Swint had mentioned that at one of the forums, and I asked James Burvig what he thought, and he just made the comment of, he thought it was an interesting idea, but he also thought if it could have been done that way, it would have been done that way already. So that might speak to, the practicality of that idea, and that's not something I'm knowledgeable about. Obviously, Corey Swint, from his public statements, he is an advocate of the city getting out of the business of buying and selling property. All right, another topic that I've been concerned about is the leftist activism at our library. I did ask the 3 candidates that I sat down with whether that was something that concerned them and whether that was something that they might seek to address. From their response, I would say that James Burvig maybe wasn't aware of those concerns, and I had not spoken with all of the city commission on that topic. I have spoken with a couple of the other commissioners. So it may have, some of it may have been things that he hadn't heard before, but he didn't seem concerned about any of what I brought forward as far as leftist activism at the library, and he didn't seem like he would do anything to try to correct that. I think the main thing the city commission could do to try to correct that is to put people on the library board who would help steer the library in a different direction. So many of you probably know, but our local public library is a city and county library. So there's a joint powers agreement between the two, and there are 8 people on the library board. And 4 of them are appointed by the city commission in Williston, and 4 of them are appointed by the Williams County Commission. And so hardly ever will you see matters on the library front go before the city commission or county commission other than these library board appointments. So I've encouraged, on the county commission front, I've encouraged them to take a more proactive role and try to put people on the library board who can steer it in a better direction. I did that a few years ago. I talked with the county commission about that. And more recently, again, I've talked to them about that. So I'm not sure. Last time they didn't make any changes. It remains to be seen this time what they will decide. So that all said, I guess I won't go into a lot of the specifics around that concern, but broadly, I would just say the book selection concerns me. People can do a simple go on the City of Williston Public Library and just do a simple card catalog search, for example, of transgender, and notice how many of the books that come up are geared toward children or juveniles or young adults. And also notice how many of the books advocate for that lifestyle and how many of them challenge the lifestyle. So that's just one of the things, but there are others, from social media posts during the month of June being concerning, displays at the library during the month of June being concerning, that advocate for the LGBTQ lifestyle, encouraging people to read books about that lifestyle. And even the summer reading program for children, a few years ago, they had kind of a like bingo card style program, and the children were encouraged to read books of a variety of topics and types of books, like, for example, fiction and biography and those sorts of things. And one of the books, one of the little assignments or types of books to read was read an LGBTQ book one year. And then another year, one of the little tasks on the summer reading program was to read a banned or challenged book. So those are broadly just some of the concerns that I have. And as far as the candidates, James Burvig, again, I already mentioned, wasn't motivated at all to address those issues and seemed to see my concerns with those sorts of decisions being made at our local library as me attempting to infringe on freedom of speech of other people, which I think is a fundamental misunderstanding of the freedom of speech, because there have always been limits around the freedom of speech, especially with content that appeals to the prurient interest of people in general, and especially minors. So that all said, I think I already said that, but I did feel like Sean Ronis and Mason White both seemed more receptive to at least hearing those concerns. I don't know that they had thought through, I don't think they were aware of those concerns prior to our conversation, and I don't think they've really thought through yet how, what their stance on it maybe is, or how to go about addressing them, but they certainly were more receptive to hearing about those concerns. All right, shifting gears, finally, I will just touch on communication with the public. I did feel like James Burvig, just in his personal approach to people, very approachable. Really, I felt like all three of the candidates I sat down with, James Burvig, Sean Ronis, and Mason White, were all pretty receptive and easy to talk to. I felt like in general they wanted to better understand where I was coming from. I did feel like, because we talked about how you would handle communication from the public, and how, would you be an advocate for making the meetings more accessible to public comment? And currently, as it stands, because of a bill that came out of the state legislature in 2025, government entities across the state have to have a portion of their meeting that is opened up for public comment. However, the entity can put some boundaries around that. For example, time limits. They can also limit it to items like on the agenda for that meeting. And that's what our current city commission has a time limit on it. I believe it's 2 or 3 minutes per person. And you also have to limit your comments to something on the agenda from that meeting or the previous meeting. And you have to fill out a card beforehand, kind of sharing what item you're wanting to address, and give it to the city administrator or someone on the commission before the meeting begins. So there are some limits around that, and I asked the different candidates I sat down with what their thoughts were on that. If, for example, the county commission doesn't put those restrictions on it, they just have a section of the meeting that they open up for public comment. It doesn't have to be whatever they bring up doesn't have to pertain to that agenda item, or excuse me, that meeting agenda or the previous meeting's agenda. And I'm not sure if they have a time limit. I haven't seen anything that they do. So it did seem like, from what I understood, James Burvig would probably leave it the way it is with the City of Williston, and Mason White and Sean Ronis would likely loosen some of those restrictions on public comment if elected to that mayoral position. Or at least it sounded like they would advocate for that. Whether or not they could just make that decision as mayor, I don't know. Or if it has to be a decision from the commission as a whole. So, and of course that goes with many of these decisions. I wanted to share with you my observations, and I wanted to share more with you about my conversations with the different candidates. But at the end of the day, a lot of their views will be part of what the city commission decides, but it does function as a board. So the mayor position is a vital one, but obviously the commission as a whole is largely how decisions are made. So that all said, I will go ahead and close with that. And I thank you for your time. And I encourage you to get out and vote on June 9th if you haven't voted absentee already. And I think perhaps you may be able to go down to the Williams County building and vote before June 9th as well, and avoid the lines. I am not positive of that that's an option, but I did see that on Facebook that was being encouraged. So I assume it is an option. I don't think it was by the Williams County themselves that were saying that. All right, I'm rambling, so I will close here. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that these videos are helpful in equipping you to decide who to vote for mayor for the City of Williston for 2026. Take care.